The year is 1887. The Wyoming wind bites hard, even in the morning sun. It's a land of dust and dreams, where a man's past can be buried under a shallow grave of lies, and the future is a horizon you might never reach. In a town like Willow Creek, a speck of civilization clinging to the edge of nowhere, secrets are the most common currency. And Marshal Jake Thornton had more secrets than any man in town. He was making his rounds, the tin coffee cup in his hand the only warmth against the chill. His boots kicked up dust on the main street, a lonely sound in a lonely town. He was a man shaped by the frontier, weathered, quiet, with eyes that had seen too much. The silver star on his vest was the only part of him that still shined. Then he heard it. A voice, no bigger than a whisper, but it stopped him cold. It cut through the wind, through the hardened shell he'd built around his heart, and hit him like a bullet. "Sir, could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day?" Jake's hand froze. He looked toward the voice. It came from the orphanage, a sagging two-story building that looked as tired and worn out as the children it held. Behind the crooked wooden fence, a little girl was staring at him. Her eyes were the color of the big Wyoming sky, and her tiny fingers were wrapped around the fence posts, like she was a prisoner begging for release. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. In his 15 years wearing a badge, Jake had faced down killers, rustlers, and gamblers. He'd stared into the eyes of men with nothing to lose and walked away. But this was different. This small question from this small child had him completely disarmed. The coffee in his cup went cold. The wind seemed to die down. The whole world narrowed to the space between a haunted lawman and a little girl with an impossible request. He had come to Willow Creek 3 years ago to run from his past. He carried a saddle, a horse named Thunder, and a collection of ghosts that rode with him every single day. The town needed a marshal, and he needed a place to disappear. It was a simple arrangement, until now. Now, he was crouched down, looking a 6-year-old girl right in the eye. Her hair was the color of wheat, pulled into 2 neat braids. Her dress was patched but clean, but it was her eyes that got to him. They were old, too old for a child. They held a sorrow that a person shouldn't have to learn for another 30 years. "What's your name, little miss?" Jake asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. "Evangeline," she whispered, "but most folks call me Evie." "Well, Miss Evie," Jake said, managing a small smile, "that's a mighty serious question. Mind if I ask why you need a pretend daddy?" Evie glanced over her shoulder at the looming shape of the orphanage. Inside, other children were getting ready. Jake could see them through the windows, moving like ghosts in their Sunday best. "Today's the day," she said, her voice heavy. "Families come to look at us. Mrs. Hartwell says we gotta be on our best behavior. Maybe someone will find a home." Jake's heart, a thing he thought had turned to stone years ago, gave a painful lurch. Adoption Day. He'd heard about it. A frontier tradition. A grim marketplace where children were chosen like livestock, judged on their strength and their health. He'd never thought about what it felt like for the kids. "And you think having a daddy with you would help?" he asked. She nodded, her grip on the fence tightening. "All the other kids, they talk about their real mamas and papas. Tommy, his pa taught him to whittle. Lucy's mama used to sing her songs, but I don't remember mine." She looked down at her worn shoes. "Mrs. Hartwell says they died in a wagon accident at the creek. I was the only one who lived. So when the families ask me about my folks, I got nothing to say. They look at me like I'm broken." Broken. The word hit Jake like a physical blow. This little girl, with her brave face and tidy braids, thought she was broken because she had no memories to offer. He wanted to tell her she wasn't broken. He wanted to tell her she was perfect, just the way she was. But he knew, in this harsh world, that words were cheap. What this little girl was asking for was not just a lie. She was asking for a shield. "Please," she whispered again, her blue eyes pleading. Just for today, so I don't look so empty. Jake looked at her, and for the first time in years, he didn't see the ghosts of his past. He saw a little girl who was just as lonely as he was. A decision formed in his mind, a reckless, foolish decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation he had. All right, Miss Evie, he heard himself say. I reckon I can clear my schedule. For today, I can be your daddy. Her eyes went wide. A smile, a real, brilliant smile, broke across her face like the sun cresting over the mountains. It was the most beautiful thing Jake had seen in years. You mean it? I mean it, he said, feeling the weight of the promise settle on him. But we better go ask permission. Can't have the town marshal breaking rules. She giggled, a sound like tiny bells, and her hand let go of the fence. She grabbed his instead, her small fingers locking with his calloused ones. Come on! Mrs. Hartwell's in the kitchen! As she pulled him toward the sagging porch of the orphanage, Jake Thornton felt like he was walking into a trap. Not a trap of guns and knives, but something far more dangerous. A trap made of hope. And he had a terrible feeling that by the end of the day, someone's heart was going to get broken. He just prayed it wouldn't be hers. The smell of baking bread and fear hit Jake as soon as they stepped inside. The orphanage was scrubbed clean, but the scent of desperation lingered in the air. Wildflowers in mason jars couldn't hide the cracks in the walls. Mrs. Hartwell was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with kind eyes behind spectacles and hands worn rough by endless work. She looked up from a tray of cookies, her expression shifting from surprise to suspicion as she saw the town marshal holding Evie's hand. Mrs. Hartwell, Evie announced, her voice full of breathless excitement. This is Marshal Thornton. He's going to be my papa for today. The woman's smile was tight. Is that so? Marshal, might I have a word? In my office. The office was a cramped, tidy room filled with ledgers and the faint scent of old paper. She closed the door, and the kindness in her eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, protective glare. Marshal, what do you think you're doing? She asked, her voice low. This isn't a game. That little girl has been passed over more times than any child in this house. Giving her false hope is the cruelest thing you could do. Jake took off his hat. Ma'am, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing. She asked me a question that, well, it got to me. I'm not looking to cause trouble. She told you about her parents, the wagon accident? She did, Jake said. Mrs. Hartwell sighed, her shoulders slumping. She was just a baby, barely 2 years old. Found clinging to a tree branch downstream, half frozen. She doesn't remember a thing. And for some folks, that's a problem. They want a story, a history. Evie has nothing. She's a blank slate, and that scares people. The phrase blank slate sent a chill down Jake's spine. He looked at the ledgers on the desk, filled with the names and histories of forgotten children. So, you'll let me do this? Jake asked. Spend the day with her? Mrs. Hartwell studied him for a long, silent moment. I can't stop you, but I'm warning you. At the end of the day, you walk away. She stays here. Can you handle that? More importantly, can she? It was a good question. A question Jake didn't have an answer to. When they returned to the main room, the other children were gathering. They were all dressed in their best clothes, their faces scrubbed, a mixture of hope and dread in their young eyes. Evie ran to Jake's side, taking his hand again as if he were an anchor in a storm. As she did, she looked up at him, her expression serious again. Mrs. Hartwell says my mama used to sing a song about a little bird with a broken wing, but I can't remember the tune. Do you know any songs about birds, Papa Jake? The name hit him in the chest. Papa Jake. But it was her words that snagged on his mind. Mrs. Hartwell had just told him Evie remembered nothing, absolutely nothing. So where did a memory of a song come from? It was a small thing, a tiny crack in the story. But Jake had learned long ago that the smallest cracks could bring the whole damn wall tumbling down. The first family to arrive were the Millers. They rolled up in a sturdy buggy, looking as grim and practical as the Wyoming landscape itself. Mr. Miller was a thick, broad-shouldered man who owned a large farm. His wife was thin-lipped and severe. They looked at the children not with warmth, but with the calculating eyes of a rancher inspecting livestock. Evie's hand tightened in Jake's. He could feel her trembling beside him on the hard sofa. Mrs. Hartwell presented the children one by one. "This is Marcus, 10 years old, very good with animals." Mrs. Miller nodded. "Can he read? Write?" "Yes, one of our best students." As they moved down the line, Jake's gaze drifted to Mr. Miller. The man was standing near the window, idly tapping a small riding crop against his boot. A horse was tied to a post just outside. For no reason at all, Miller leaned out the window and flicked the crop, striking the horse on its flank. The animal shied, startled. Miller just smirked. A casual cruelty. The kind that told you everything you needed to know about a man. Finally, Mrs. Hartwell brought them to Evie. "And this is Evangeline, she's 7. Mrs. Miller looked Evie up and down, her lip curling. "She's small for 7. The work on a farm is hard. We need a child who can pull their own weight." Before Jake could say a word, Evie spoke up, her voice small but clear. "I'm stronger than I look, ma'am. I can carry 2 buckets of water from the well." "That's admirable," Mr. Miller said, his tone dismissive. "But we need someone who can handle real work, hauling hay, mucking out stalls. I'm afraid you're just too delicate." "She's got a good heart," Jake found himself saying, his voice hard. "And she's smart as a whip." Mr. Miller's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "A friend of the family," Jake said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He put a protective arm around Evie's shoulders. Mrs. Miller sniffed. "I see. Well, we were hoping for a child without complications. If she has family nearby, there could be divided loyalties." They moved on, eventually settling on Marcus, the 10-year-old boy. As they filled out the paperwork, Jake watched them. Marcus looked more resigned than happy. As the Millers were leaving, Jake was standing by the door. He heard Mrs. Miller whisper to her husband. "He'll have to do," she said. "But he's not as compliant as the last one." The last one? What did that mean? The casual cruelty with the horse, the talk of complications, and now this strange comment. It felt wrong, all of it. The second family, the Hendersons, were young and flashy. They were looking for a pretty girl to dress up like a doll. They cooed over a little girl with golden curls named Melody, ignoring Evie completely. "She's too serious," Mrs. Henderson whispered to her husband, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want a child who smiles." Jake felt Evie flinch. He squeezed her hand. "Some folks are fools, sweetheart. They wouldn't know a diamond if it was sitting right in front of them." He was rewarded with a watery smile, but as the Hendersons left with a beaming Melody, Jake noticed something. Mr. Henderson, a slick man with oiled hair, had a tattoo on his wrist, mostly hidden by his cuff, a coiled snake eating its own tail. Jake's blood ran cold. He'd seen that symbol before. It was the mark of a gang of thieves and cutthroats that used to operate down near the border. A vicious crew. What was a man like that doing adopting a child? 2 families. 2 strange, unsettling feelings. This wasn't just a sad day at the orphanage. Something else was happening here. Something dark. Evie was quiet now, the hope draining from her face. To distract her, Jake pulled a silver dollar from his pocket. "Hey, ever see a coin disappear?" He did a simple sleight-of-hand trick his own father had taught him. As he moved his hands, something slipped from his vest pocket and fell to the floor with a soft clink. It was his locket, an old, battered silver locket he never took off. It fell open on the floorboards. Inside was a tiny, faded portrait of a woman with a kind smile and a little girl with dark hair. His wife Sarah, and his daughter Lily, the ghosts he ran from every day. Evie gasped. She pointed a trembling finger at the locket. "That's her," she whispered, her voice full of awe and terror. "That's the lady from my dreams, the lady who sings the song about the bird." Jake's world stopped spinning. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. His daughter, Lily, was dead. She had died 5 years ago, along with his wife, in a fire set by a monster named Silas Kane. He'd seen the graves himself. So how could this orphan girl, Eve, possibly know her face? "What did you say?" Jake asked, his voice a raw whisper. "The lady," Evie repeated, her eyes wide and fixed on the tiny portrait. "She sings to me when I sleep. I told you." Jake's mind was a whirlwind. Coincidence? A child's fantasy? He looked from the locket to Evie's face, the song she'd mentioned earlier, the lady from her dreams, Mrs. Hartwell's insistence she remembered nothing. It was all connected. He scooped up the locket and snapped it shut, his hand shaking. He stood up and strode toward Mrs. Hartwell's office, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Evie followed, scared and confused. He didn't knock. He threw the door open. Mrs. Hartwell jumped, startled. "The story about the wagon accident," Jake demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Is it true?" "Marshall, I don't know what you... Is it true?" he roared, slamming his hand on her desk. "Evie says she remembers things. She recognized the picture in my locket, a picture of my dead daughter." Mrs. Hartwell's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking old and frail. "A child's imagination, Marshall. She's a lonely girl. She makes things up." "I don't believe you," Jake growled. "Show me the record, the ledger you mentioned. Show me the entry for when she arrived." Her hands trembled as she pulled a heavy, leather-bound book from a shelf. She opened it, her fingers fumbling with the pages. "Here, see? Evangeline, found June 1882. Parents John and Mary Abernathy. Deceased." Jake stared at the page. The names were there. The date was there. But something was wrong. The ink. The ink for Evie's entry was a shade darker than the entries above and below it. It looked newer, fresher, like it had been written recently. "This is a lie," Jake said, his voice flat. "You wrote this in here later." Mrs. Hartwell flinched as if struck. "No, I would never—" "Who is she?" Jake demanded, leaning over the desk, his shadow falling over her. "Who is this little girl, and why are you lying about her past?" Tears welled in Mrs. Hartwell's eyes. She looked from Jake to the terrified child hiding behind his legs. She opened her mouth to speak, but just then, the front bell of the orphanage chimed. Another family had arrived. "Please, Marshall," Mrs. Hartwell begged, her voice cracking. "Not now. We can't talk about this now." Jake was torn. His every instinct screamed at him to press her, to break her, to get the truth. But he looked down at Evie, who was clutching his trousers, shaking. He couldn't do this in front of her. He straightened up, his eyes promising Mrs. Hartwell that this was not over. "Fine. We'll finish this later." He took Evie's hand and led her back to the parlor, his mind racing. The fresh ink, the song, the locket, Mrs. Hartwell's terror. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a canyon in the dark, knowing that one more step would send him plunging into an abyss of truth he might not be ready for. The new family was the Caldwells. They were different from the others. They were in their 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands. Mr. Caldwell was tall and wore the look of a man who worked hard under the sun. Mrs. Caldwell had a warmth about her that instantly put the children at ease. They didn't ask about chores or strength. They asked the children about their favorite stories and what they dreamed of at night. They moved through the room like a gentle breeze after a storm. When they reached Evie, Mrs. Caldwell knelt down so she was at the little girl's eye level. "Hello, dear." she said with a warm smile. What's your name? Evangeline, Evie whispered. But folks call me Evie. That's a beautiful name, Mrs. Caldwell said. It means bringer of good news. I think it suits you. For the first time since the locket incident, Evie smiled a little. And who is this gentleman? Mr. Caldwell asked, nodding to Jake. This is my Papa Jake, Evie said, her voice small but firm. Jake saw the question in the Caldwell's eyes, but they were too polite to ask. He simply nodded. Jake Thornton, pleased to meet you. Our pleasure, Mr. Thornton, Mrs. Caldwell said. She then turned her full attention back to Evie. Tell me, Evie, what do you want to be when you grow up? Evie thought for a moment. Maybe a teacher, so I can help other kids learn to read, or maybe a nurse to help folks when they're sick. Mrs. Caldwell's smile widened. Those are wonderful dreams. She paused, her expression growing tender. You know, we had a son once. His name was David. He loved to read stories just like you. What happened to him? Evie asked with the frankness of a child. He got sick a few winters ago, Mrs. Caldwell said softly. He's with the angels now. Our hearts have been empty for a long time. We're hoping to find another child to share our home and our love with. The sincerity in her voice was a stark contrast to the greed of the Millers and the vanity of the Hendersons. Jake felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt all day. Hope. But then Evie, emboldened by their kindness, did something that made Jake's blood freeze. She reached into Jake's vest pocket, where he had tucked the locket away. She pulled it out. I don't remember my real mama and papa, Evie said, her voice trembling as she fumbled with the clasp. But I dream of a lady. She sings to me. She got the locket open and held it out to Mrs. Caldwell. She looks like this. The room went silent. Mrs. Caldwell stared at the tiny portrait inside the locket. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her face went as white as a sheet. She wasn't looking at the picture of the child. She was looking at the woman with the kind smile, Jake's wife, Sarah. This locket, Mrs. Caldwell whispered, her voice choked with disbelief. She reached out a trembling hand not to take it, but to trace the intricate floral engraving on the silver casing. Where did you get this? She asked Jake, her eyes wide with a wild, impossible question. It was my wife's, Jake said, his throat tight. She died 5 years ago. The engraving, Mrs. Caldwell breathed, ignoring his words. This pattern, my sister had a locket just like this. It was one of a kind. Our father, a silversmith, made one for each of us before he passed. She looked up at Jake, her eyes swimming with tears. My sister's name was Sarah. The name hung in the air between them. Sarah, Jake's wife. Sarah? Thornton? Mrs. Caldwell whispered, her voice cracking. Jake could only nod, his mind struggling to catch up. It couldn't be. The world wasn't that small. My name is Martha, she said, tears now streaming down her face. Martha Caldwell. Sarah was my sister. I thought... They told me everyone died in the attack. The stagecoach. They told me you died too. The floor beneath Jake's feet seemed to vanish. Martha, his wife's younger sister. He hadn't seen her since his wedding day. She had moved west with her new husband years before Sarah's death. But that wasn't the biggest shock. The biggest shock was the look on Martha's face as she stared past Jake, at the little girl holding the locket. The attack! Martha choked out, her gaze fixed on Evie. Silas Kane and his men, they attacked the stagecoach. Sarah was visiting me. She had her daughter with her. She took a shaky step forward, her eyes never leaving the child. He left Sarah for dead, Martha sobbed. And he took the girl. He took her. I was wounded. I couldn't stop him. I've been searching for her ever since, for 5 years. She knelt in front of the confused and frightened little girl. Lily? Martha whispered, her voice full of 5 years of pain and hope. Is that you? Your mother called you her little bird. The song. The song about the bird. The ledger with the fresh ink. Mrs. Hartwell's lies. The little girl who looked nothing like the Abernathy parents described in the fake record. It all crashed down on Jake Thornton with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't Evie. This wasn't some random orphan. This was Lily, his daughter who was supposed to be dead, his little girl, alive, standing right in front of him. He staggered back, his hand going to the wall for support. The ghosts he'd been running from for 5 years weren't ghosts at all. One of them was real. She had her mother's eyes and a name he hadn't dared to speak in half a decade. Lily. His daughter was alive, and she had been living in this orphanage, just a 3-day ride from where he'd been hiding, for years. The joy was a blinding flash, so bright it was painful, but it was followed immediately by a chilling, terrifying question. Why? Why was she here? Why the lie? Who was protecting her, and what were they protecting her from? His eyes snapped to Mrs. Hartwell, who was cowering by her office door, her face a mask of pure terror. You, Jake snarled, taking a step toward her. You knew who she was. I had to, Mrs. Hartwell cried, shrinking back. He made me. He said he'd burn this place to the ground with all the children in it if I ever told anyone. He? Jake demanded. Who is he? The man who brought her here, she sobbed. He gave her a new name, paid me every month to keep her hidden, to make sure she was never adopted by anyone who might ask too many questions. He said she was a witness, that she saw him do a terrible thing. A witness, the stagecoach attack, the murder of his wife. Lily had seen it. She'd seen her mother die. The man who had destroyed Jake's life had not killed his daughter. He had hidden her, kept her as a living secret, a loose end he could watch from afar. Who is he? Jake asked again, his voice deadly calm. What's his name? He told me to call him Mr. Smith, she whimpered. But I know that's not his real name. He's a powerful man, owns a big ranch east of here. A cruel man. He came here today. Jake's blood turned to ice. He came here? Today? Yes, Mrs. Hartwell whispered. He was the first one. The farmer. Mr. Miller. The man with the riding crop and the casual cruelty. The man who was looking for a child. Why? William Caldwell asked, stepping forward to stand beside Jake, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Why would he come here? He heard a rumor, Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice barely audible. A rumor about a girl at the orphanage who matched the description. He didn't come to adopt. He came to see if it was her, to see if the last witness to his crimes was still alive. The adoption day wasn't a marketplace, it was an inspection. And Silas Kane, living under the name Miller, had just inspected his last loose end. He had looked his witness in the eye. He had rejected her, calling her too small, too delicate. A perfect way to dismiss her without raising suspicion. But he knew. He had to know. He'd seen the resemblance, or maybe he'd seen the ghost of Sarah in her eyes. He hadn't taken her because that would have been too obvious. No, his plan would be much simpler. He would come back. He would come back when the sun went down and the world was quiet, and he would silence the little girl who could identify him as a murderer. He would finish the job he started 5 years ago. A sudden commotion from outside shattered the tense silence. The sound of horses, many horses, surrounding the orphanage. Jake ran to the window. In the fading light, he could see them. A dozen riders, fanning out, blocking any chance of escape. At the front of the group, sitting on a large black horse, was Mr. Miller, Silas Kane. A cruel smirk was on his face, and beside him, looking smug, was the slick city man with the snake tattoo. Mr. Henderson, his gang. They hadn't come to adopt children. They had come as scouts. The orphanage wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a tomb, and they were all trapped inside with the man who had come to bury his last secret. "Get the children away from the windows!" Jake yelled, his marshal's training kicking in, overriding the storm of emotion in his chest. "Bar the doors, now!" William Caldwell, his face grim, was already moving, directing the older children. "You heard the marshal, let's move!" Martha Caldwell, her face streaked with tears but her eyes full of fire, grabbed Lily, Evie, and pulled her close. "You're not getting her," she vowed to the figures outside. Mrs. Hartwell was frozen in shock. "They'll kill us all." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Jake growled. He checked his Colt Peacemaker, the worn metal familiar and comforting in his hand. For 5 years, he'd hunted Silas Kane for revenge. He'd dreamed of the day he'd put a bullet in the man who murdered his wife. But now, it wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. It was about the little girl cowering in the corner. His daughter. He hadn't been there to protect her 5 years ago. He would not fail her again. "Hartwell!" Jake snapped, grabbing the woman by the shoulders. "You've lived in this building for years. Are there any other ways out? Secret passages? A cellar door?" The woman's terrified eyes flickered with a spark of memory. "The old root cellar, under the kitchen. The door is hidden beneath a floorboard under the pantry shelves. It leads out to the creek bed behind the woods." "Good," Jake said. "William, you and Martha get the children down there. All of them. Keep them quiet and get them out. I'll hold them off here." "Like hell you will," William said, pulling a rifle from a long case he'd brought in from his wagon. "I was with the 7th Cavalry for 10 years. I'm not running while a snake like that threatens my family." He looked at Martha and Lily. Our family. Jake looked at the determined set of William's jaw and nodded. He was grateful for the help. He was no longer a lone man fighting his ghosts. Outside, Kane's voice boomed. "Thornton, I know you're in there. I should have killed you on that road 5 years ago. Send out the girl, and I'll let the rest of them live." It was a lie. Kane would leave no witnesses. "He's come for me, hasn't he?" a small voice said. Jake turned. Lily was standing there, no longer hiding behind Martha. She was holding the silver locket in her hand, her knuckles white. The fear was still in her eyes, but underneath it was a flicker of something else. A strength she must have gotten from her mother. "Yes, sweetheart," Jake said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "He has." "Because I saw him," she whispered. "In my dreams. It's not a dream, is it? I remember. A loud noise. And my mama falling. He had a face like a vulture." The vulture. The nickname the gangs had for Silas Kane. "You don't have to remember that anymore," Jake said, kneeling in front of her. "That's my job now. My job is to make sure you never have to be scared of him again. Do you understand?" She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "Martha," Jake said, his eyes locking with his sister-in-law's, "get them to the cellar. Go." Martha nodded, herding the children, including her newfound niece, toward the kitchen. "William, be careful. Always am," he said with a grim smile. That left Jake and William in the main room, the windows barricaded with furniture, the last light of day filtering through the cracks. They could hear Kane's men circling the house, testing the doors, shouting threats. "2 of us against a dozen of them," William said, checking the load in his rifle. "Long odds." "I've faced worse," Jake said, but he knew this was different. The stakes had never been higher. Suddenly, a shotgun blast blew a hole in the front door, sending splinters flying. They were coming in. "Get ready," Jake said, taking position behind an overturned sofa. The shattered door burst open, and 2 of Kane's men rushed in, guns blazing. William's rifle cracked once. The first man went down. Jake's Colt barked twice. The second man crumpled to the floor. But more were coming. They poured in through the door and now through the windows, shattering the glass. The parlor became a chaotic storm of gunfire, smoke, and shouting. Jake and William fought back to back, a desperate two-man army against a tide of violence. They were good, but they were outnumbered. One of the thugs, the slick Mr. Henderson with the snake tattoo, managed to get past them. He wasn't focused on the two men fighting for their lives. He was running toward the kitchen. He knew. Kane must have told him about the children. "Go!" Jake yelled at William. "I'll hold the front." William didn't hesitate. He broke off and sprinted after Henderson, tackling him just as he reached the kitchen door. The two men crashed to the floor in a brutal tangle of fists and curses. Jake was alone, facing four more of Kane's men. A bullet grazed his arm, a hot slash of pain. He gritted his teeth, fired back, and took down another one. 3 left. They were closing in, trying to flank him. He was pinned down. He was going to be overwhelmed. Suddenly, a section of the wall behind Kane's men swung inward. It was a hidden door, one even Mrs. Hartwell hadn't mentioned. And standing in the opening was Mrs. Hartwell herself. But the terrified, whimpering woman was gone. In her place was a woman with cold, hard eyes, and in her hands she held an ancient-looking, double-barreled shotgun. "Get away from these children!" she screamed, her voice a raw battle cry. She pulled both triggers. The shotgun roared like a dragon, filling the hallway with fire and lead. The blast caught the remaining 3 thugs in the back, sending them flying across the room. The parlor fell silent, the air thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Jake stared at Mrs. Hartwell in stunned silence. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father was a buffalo hunter," she said, breaking open the shotgun to reload with steady hands. "I'm not just a baker of cookies, Marshall." In the kitchen, the sounds of fighting had stopped. William appeared in the doorway, bruised but standing. Henderson was lying motionless on the floor. They had done it. They had stopped the assault. But it wasn't over. The main threat was still outside. Silas Kane was still out there. And he knew his men had failed. Jake moved cautiously to the shattered front window, peering through a crack. Kane was still on his horse, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. He had expected an easy slaughter, not a pitched battle. Then Kane did something that made Jake's heart stop. He wasn't looking at the house anymore. He was looking past it, toward the creek bed, toward the woods where the cellar exit was. He had anticipated the escape route. He wasn't trying to get in anymore. He was waiting for them to come out. He was waiting for Lily. "He knows," Jake breathed. "He's heading for the cellar exit." "Martha and the children are walking right into a trap," William said, his face pale. "I'm going after him," Jake said, already moving. "You stay here. Barricade this door for real. Don't let anyone else in or out." "Jake, you can't face him alone." "I'm not alone," Jake said, looking at the determined faces of William and Mrs. Hartwell. "You're protecting them here. I'm protecting them out there. It's the only way." He didn't wait for an answer. He ran through the kitchen, past the stunned but safe children who hadn't made it to the cellar yet, and plunged into the dark, musty root cellar. He could hear Martha up ahead, trying to keep the younger children quiet. He had to get to her. He had to get to them before Kane did. He ran through the darkness, guided only by the faint sounds of his family ahead. His family. The word felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. The tunnel was longer than he expected, damp and smelling of earth. Up ahead, he could see a sliver of moonlight. The exit. He could hear Martha hushing the children. They were almost there. And then he heard another sound. The sound of a horse's hooves just outside the exit. He was too late. Come out, wherever you are." Kane's voice sneered from just outside the tunnel. "Let's not make this any harder than it needs to be." Jake burst out of the tunnel just as Martha was helping the last of the children out into the small clearing by the creek. Silas Kane was there, sitting on his horse like a king on a throne. He held a pistol in his hand, and it was pointed directly at Martha, and at the small girl clinging to her skirts, Lily. "Thornton," Kane said with a smirk, his eyes glittering with evil. I knew you wouldn't be far behind. It all comes full circle, doesn't it? You, me, and the girl. Let them go, Kane, Jake said, his own pistol steady in his hand. This is between you and me. Oh, I think not, Kane chuckled. She's the reason for all this. The little bird who saw too much. It's time for her to stop singing. He cocked the hammer on his pistol. Time seemed to slow down. The chirping of the crickets, the rustle of the leaves, the terrified gasps of the children. Jake saw it all in a flash. The gun in Kane's hand, the terrified face of his daughter, the years of running, the years of loneliness. It all ended here, tonight. He could shoot, but Kane was faster on the draw, and his gun was already aimed. If Jake fired, Kane would fire, and Lily would be caught in the middle. There was only one way. You want the witness, Kane? Jake shouted. You want the person who saw you murder my wife? Well, she's not the only one. Kane frowned, confused. What are you talking about, Thornton? There was another survivor of that stagecoach attack, Jake lied, his mind racing, buying time. Someone you missed, someone who's been talking to the federal marshals for months. They have your name, Kane. They have a warrant. Killing us won't save you. It will only bring the whole damn government down on your head. It was a bluff, a wild, desperate gamble. But for a split second, it worked. Kane hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. Could it be true? Had he missed someone? That split second was all Jake needed. He didn't fire at Kane. He fired at the rocky outcrop just above Kane's head. The bullet struck the loose shale, sending a shower of rocks and pebbles cascading down. It wasn't an avalanche, but it was enough. The horse, already spooked, reared up in terror, screaming and bucking. Kane, caught off guard, fought to control his mount, his gun swinging wildly. Now! Jake screamed at Martha. Get the children into the woods! Run! Martha didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her, along with the other children, into the dark cover of the trees. Kane finally wrestled his horse under control, his face a mask of fury. He leveled his pistol, not at the fleeing children, but at Jake. You'll pay for that, Thornton, he roared. His gun flashed in the darkness. Jake felt a searing pain in his side as a bullet tore through him. He stumbled, falling to one knee, his own gun slipping from his grasp. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. Kane dismounted, striding toward him, his boots crunching on the gravel. He raised his pistol, aiming it directly at Jake's head. The moonlight glinted off the barrel. Any last words? Kane sneered. Jake looked past him, past the monster who had taken everything from him, and saw a flicker of movement in the woods. He saw his daughter peeking out from behind a tree, her face a mask of terror. He had to save her. He had to give her a chance. Yeah, Jake gasped, forcing a bloody smile. Look behind you. It was the oldest trick in the book. But Kane, arrogant and consumed by his victory, fell for it. He glanced over his shoulder for just a fraction of a second. It was enough time for Jake to lunge. He ignored the fire in his side and threw himself forward, not at Kane's gun, but at his legs. He tackled the larger man, sending them both crashing to the ground. His vision was blurring, his strength was fading. But he held on, wrestling with the man who had haunted his life. Kane was stronger. He brought the butt of his pistol down hard on Jake's head. The world exploded in a flash of white, then darkness. Jake's grip loosened. Kane scrambled to his feet, breathing heavily. He stood over Jake, raising the pistol again for the final shot. Goodbye, Marshal, he hissed. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Kane's gun. Kane looked down in surprise. A dark red stain was spreading across the front of his shirt. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, toward the dark shape of the orphanage. He crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the dirt. Jake, his head clearing slightly, pushed himself up. He looked toward the house. Standing on the back porch, silhouetted by the lamplight from within, was William Caldwell. The rifle in his hands was still smoking. He had made the shot from over 100 yards, in the dark. "Told you I was in the 7th Cavalry," William said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We don't leave our people behind." The fight was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, small figures began to emerge from the woods, the children followed by Martha, and at the front, running toward him, was Lily. "Papa Jake!" she cried, her voice full of terror and relief. She threw her arms around his neck as he knelt in the dirt, the pain in his side forgotten for a moment. He held her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the frantic beat of her heart against his chest. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's over now. You're safe." He hadn't just been pretending to be her father for a day. He had been her father his entire life. He just hadn't known it. And now, surrounded by the family he never knew he had, under the vast, starry Wyoming sky, Jake Thornton finally felt like he was home. The weeks that followed were a blur of healing, both for the wound in Jake's side and the wounds in all their hearts. Kane's gang was rounded up. The town of Willow Creek, horrified by the truth, rallied around the orphanage. Mrs. Hartwell, cleared of any wrongdoing by Jake's own testimony, found her pantry mysteriously full and her firewood pile stacked high by grateful townsfolk. The miller's farm was taken over by the county, and the boy, Marcus, was brought back to the orphanage, where he was soon adopted by a kind family who just wanted a son, not a slave. But the biggest change happened at the Caldwell Ranch. It was decided, without question, that Lily would go home with her aunt and uncle. But as they prepared to leave, a new question arose. What about Jake? He sat on the porch of the Caldwell's now-repaired house watching Lily, who decided she liked the name Evie because it was a name full of happy memories now, chasing butterflies in the yard. Martha sat down beside him. "You know, there's a small cabin at the edge of our property. Hasn't been used in years. A man could fix it up if he had a mind to." Jake looked at her. A man. "A man who might want to be close to his daughter," she said softly. "A man who might be tired of being a lonely lawman." William came out and clapped him on the shoulder. "This is your home too, Jake. If you want it, family belongs together." Jake looked out at Evie. She had stopped chasing butterflies and was looking at him, a hopeful, questioning look on her face. The same look she'd had that first day at the orphanage fence. He had spent 5 years running from his past. 5 years trying to outrun the pain, but the past had found him. And instead of destroying him, it had given him back everything he thought he'd lost. He was no longer Marshall Thornton, the haunted drifter. He was Jake Thornton, a brother-in-law, an uncle, a father. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I reckon," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that cabin is going to need a lot of work." He didn't just pretend to be a daddy for a day. That day, he became the father he was always meant to be. And in the wild, unforgiving land of Wyoming, a broken man and a lost little girl, surrounded by the family they had found in the fire, finally pieced each other back together. They were not broken. They were home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the world. And let us know in the comments, what part of Jake and Evie's journey surprised you the most?